Hello and welcome to our 5 minutes with Ekaterina war vlog about Dnipro, the central Ukraine. Today we have a few topics to cover because there are a few very important things that happened since we talked the last time. And the first thing is the deterioration of the security situation in the city itself, because on the night from July 25th to July 26th, there was massive bombing on the city. It was the biggest bombing ever we have ever experienced since the beginning of the war, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And the attack lasted for almost 6 hours with a short break in the middle. It started at 1:30 in the nighttime AM, and then it lasted until 6 AM. It was very devastating. Multiple drones, multiple rockets, anti-missile system tried to hit it, and the whole situation was very terrible. It was very scary. Nobody slept that night. Thankfully, I was not in the city itself, but it was very scary to read it on the news in the morning and then to call your friends, to call the relatives, trying to figure out how did they go through the night. And the whole situation is very bad because there are places that were damaged, and there are also victims, people who died. And that shows that Russia increased significantly their capacity to bomb us, and that also shows that Dnipro is very much on the top of the list of the bombed cities. I have a friend and student who lives in Odessa now. He is a foreigner, and he asked me to evaluate the security situation in terms of if it's safer in Dnipro than in Odessa, which he believes is so. And if you think about the big cities that are bombed in Ukraine, probably the worst situation is still in Kharkiv, which is very close to the Russian border. It's about 30 kilometers to the border, and Russians deploy Kab rockets all the time. And there is a neighborhood called Saltovka, which is closer to Russian border, that is almost destroyed in Kharkiv. On top of this, Russians deploy drones there, Russians deploy long-range missiles there, and they are also in the constant threat of the land invasion, which happened in the very beginning of this full-scale invasion in 2022. Then I would place probably Chernihiv and Sumy, the region on the north that is closer to Belarusian border, but it's also close to the Russian border, and Russians are trying to capture it now constantly, so they have constant bombings as well. Then in terms of the number of explosions, in terms of the number of bombings, would probably go Kyiv, and this night in Kyiv was heartbreaking, and Russians specifically killed civilians there. They hit the residential building, and I know from my Facebook friends that they personally rented the apartment to the refugees from Mariupol who lived in Kyiv. And right now, the flat, it's confirmed the flat was destroyed, but inside of the apartment there was a family of husband, wife, and a small 2-year-old child, and they are listed as missing persons now. We don't know what happened to them, regretfully, and there is a very big threat, a very big chance that they might not survive this night, and a lot of people, they are panicking, they want to go somewhere from the city, and that's these residential buildings, they are hit by numerous drones. Anti-missile exists in Kyiv, but it's not enough. It's definitely not enough, and the international help is reduced now due to the American policy, and because of this, we simply don't have rockets just to follow. And then in terms of security, I would probably, in terms of less dangerous places, I would probably place Odessa, which suffers from the multiple explosions daily and or weekly, let's say, maybe not daily, but weekly. but it is a resort city, meaning that a lot of people go there for vacation, specifically from Kharkiv, specifically from Dnipro, because the level of danger is more or less the same, or if compared to Kharkiv, it's less dangerous, so people go there. And people on the beach just observing the drones flying, which is terrible. It's um, I cannot really explain how would you take your children and go there to this, like for the recreation, just to swim in the sea. But people do it. People are pretty much resilient, and I think that Odessa is less safe than Dnipro. But my friend who lives in Odessa now, he thinks that Dnipro is less safe than Odessa. I would place Dnipro after Odessa in terms of the number of explosions, right up to the 26th of July when we had this huge, massive attack. And then other cities are affected. Zaporizhia is heavily affected, so maybe it also goes somewhere in between of Odessa, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia's front line is now very close to the city itself, so they also have the regions, the neighborhoods where the Cub rockets can reach, and Russians hit residential buildings with Cub rockets, a little bit similar to the Kharkiv region, but it's still, the front line is still a little bit farther away than the Russian border in Kharkiv. And then the nearby cities, the Kamensk was hit, and tonight actually, and people died there in their homes. And also in Zaporizhia, for example, they hit the prison, and inmates, at least 16 inmates died, and there were many wounded because the Russian rocket directly hit the prison. That's devastating. In Kamensk, the Russians killed the pregnant woman in the maternity hospital. So they specifically targeted hospital, which is not in use for us, but because they used this long-range ballistic missile, the anti-missile systems usually have problems detecting them, so you wouldn't have the siren when it flies, so you wouldn't always have the siren when it flies. And that's exactly what happened. The siren wasn't on, so people did not have time to go to the shelter, because in hospitals usually they do have good shelters and they go to the shelter, but people didn't have enough time, and there was a direct arrival in the maternity hospital, and a lot of people were wounded, but this pregnant woman was killed, and along with her in hospital killed 5 other people. So that's absolutely inappropriate terror towards civilians, towards the peaceful population, and Russia is doing it over and over again. And their propaganda machine, they have the host, probably, I don't know how would you call people who are lying on TV all the time, but one of them, a person who lied about Beslan terror years ago, and that was the start of her career, when she tried to, in Russia itself, she tried to lie to her own people. And now she's lying constantly about the war, but she's saying that Ukrainian strategy is to induce terror on the civilian population in Russia when we have some retaliations, all refineries attacks or some military bases attacks. And she says that the Ukraine wants the Russian population to actually go against the government and to start rebellion. And that's actually pretty much the Russian tactics, and that's what they're trying to do. They try to put the Ukrainians into unrest, to bring people on the streets against the government. And going into it, moving, so Russia doesn't want Ukrainians to go on the street, and Russia doesn't want Ukrainians to rebel against the government. But also, Ukrainian government is not behaving as people expect it to behave. I personally did not participate in the previous election. I was abroad at the time, and for me logistically it was difficult to vote, so I did not vote for the government that we have now. I'm not proud of this. I'm just saying that I'm not sharing any responsibility, but I'm also, I cannot say, oh, I voted against it, because I didn't vote at all. But if you know me, I've never been the eager supporter of the government, of nowadays government. My idea is that we cannot have elections, and Russia wants us to have elections. Russia doesn't like this government, and I don't think that we can logistically do it during the war because of the security. You cannot ensure that the bomb wouldn't just arrive into the voting point, killing people there, because Russians kill people receiving the humanitarian aid in the border regions in Pokrovsk, for example, which is still under Ukrainian control. But probably the fall of Pokrovsk is the question of when rather than if it happens. So Pokrovsk is a very bad situation. But what Russians are doing, they just specifically hit the humanitarian aid points to kill people who come there to receive some food. And Russians always wanted us to go on the streets. But our government, despite having a lot of support previously from Ukrainians and the huge unconditional support from abroad, they started to believe that they're gods, and they started to believe that people really support them, which if you look at the previous polls, it wasn't true, but it's not true anymore. And they started to act stupidly, specifically towards what's happening inside of the country. And we had a few anti-corruption organizations, and we had anti-corruption committees which did work, and they are still working. But they started with the arrests of the anti-corruption activists and with charging them for the stupid charges. Then they started to go against the law, and they did not appoint the person who was voted for the chief anti-corruption officer. And then the unbelievably wrong decision was made by not by the government, but by the parliament, with the initiative, supporting the initiative of the government and supporting the initiative of specifically personally the President Zelensky, who said that we need to take our independent anti-corruption institutions and subordinate them to the president. The problem is that there are few people very close to the president that are subject to this anti-corruption investigation in these bodies. And that means that there is a very big threat that these cases would never be prosecuted or even investigated properly, because these anti-corruption bodies will be subordinated to the president directly. And that was probably the point when people did not want to tolerate the situation. And strangely enough, it's not my age, despite I've never been on protests. I'm not a person who goes on the street. I might sign the petition, I will talk to you, I would educate my students, I would try to talk to people individually. But I'm not the kind of a person who goes on the streets, and sometimes it's not safe, because the peaceful protests often in Ukraine go into the clashes with the police or the clashes between protesters, so it's never safe, first of all. But also, I'm not a great believer that it works. Maybe I'm wrong, because I lived abroad and I see that in some countries it works, in some countries it doesn't work. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not, but I just don't have this protesting spirit. But my friends of the same age who do have this spirit, a lot of them are at the front line now, and some of them were bought by the government. If they're in media, they were bought or somehow pressed by the government, and they think that it's not time to go on the streets. We just need to fight Russia. We don't need any unrest. We don't need any tension that Russia can use against Ukrainians. And we didn't, like my generation, people, millennials, didn't want to go on the streets. And then we just didn't pay attention, and the government didn't pay attention. Nobody paid attention to this generation of young people who grew up during the war. So they are now 18, 20 years old, and the 11 years of their lives, so the half of their life, was the war as far as they can remember themselves. They had 2014, and they witnessed the revolution of 2014, then they witnessed the Russian invasion of 2014, then they witnessed the full-scale invasion, and they are deprived of the right to participate in the elections, because the elections are not happening. And we just didn't pay attention. We didn't know that they exist as active citizens. We thought that they're still children, and nobody was paying attention. They're all in their TikToks and stuff. But that are the people who actually went on the streets in Kiev, they went on the streets in Dnipro specifically. And when you look at the protests in Dnipro, you will see very young people, mostly girls, with the cardboard posters, handwritten posters, saying different things with a lot of obscure language, which they are criticized by the older generations. And they just say that they don't want any corruption, and they're against the law that this parliament passed from this presidential initiative that anti-corruption bodies should be subordinated to the government. But it's not about these bodies. It's about the right to be heard. It's about Zelensky trying to kill the civil rights, trying to kill the independent media, trying to kill basically the anti-corruption institutions, and fighting corruption is our main priority because that's how we might be able to enter into the European community as a part of the European Union, what the country wishes for. And 10 years ago, the whole war started with these events, with us Ukrainians saying that we want to be the part of Europe and we want to enter European Union in opposition to the Russian Federation, as Russia always hoped to. So that means that the young generation grew up, and it's amazing because we didn't know they exist, we didn't count on them, and they are very active. Again, I'm very happy that there are a lot of girls, a lot of very young girls protesting and saying that they want to be heard. There are few men, few young men there, and there are fewer older people who are kind of joining these protests now, but it's not something that was initiated by any millennials, so they are Zoomers. We call them Zoomer population, and I do really support these people, and I'm really proud that they did it. Hopefully the law will be inverted, and it's very difficult to predict what will happen if it wouldn't be inverted, if it wouldn't be called back. We'll see. Nobody knows the future, but Dnipro was one of the cities where these protests happened, and where people went on the streets to literally express their opinion because they don't have any other option to express their opinion. And the last point I wanted to make today, I know that the video is already too long, but I was asked by someone, is it true that there is Western and Eastern Ukraine, and Western Ukraine has never experienced the war and Eastern Ukraine did, and that's why people are divided geographically in Ukraine. And that was something brought up by a pro-Ukrainian person, and because I had to answer this question, I was thinking that maybe you also were asking yourself about it. So Ukraine is a huge country. It's like huge country, and we have regions, but the regions are very diverse. In Crimea, we have Crimean Tatars population. In the central Ukraine, we have a huge Jewish community. We have Syrian refugees community, pretty big Muslim community here. And then we have Belarusian community in the northern Ukraine, and the Belarusian language survived there. So Belarusian language did not survive in Belarus, but it did survive in Ukraine naturally in these border northern regions. We have Western Ukraine bordering Romania and bordering Poland, for example, bordering Hungary. So these regions, they have their own dialects. Carpathian region has a lot of dialects. And Ukraine is really patchy because it's huge, and the communities can develop freely. We don't have centralized system as in Russia, for example, or in North Korea or in Iran. So the regions are patchy, the religions are different, the speaking way or dialects are different. A lot of people speak Surgics, different Surgics. I have a language video on this channel about it. And that means that there is no division on the east and west. There are multiple regions in Ukraine with their own culture, with their own attitudes and traditions, with their own societies. And the division on in this east and west is a very artificial propaganda which is imposed by Russia. And some Ukrainians also read it, because I read it since I remember myself, since a very early childhood. Russians were saying there is East and West, and there is a tension between East and West, and there is Russian and Ukrainian speakers, which is not true. I just traveled, I went back from the Western Ukraine, and I traveled across 900 kilometers from Dnipro to Yarenchi and to Bukovel. We just went for vacation, And people speak differently everywhere. It's not classic Ukrainian. I haven't heard a single word in classic Ukrainian anywhere. It's very interesting how people speak. In Vinnytsia, the dialect is very strange, and a lot of people also speak Russian. Everywhere we came, people were very friendly, and they were very supportive. They said that they're sorry for what's happening in Dnipro, and they were very kind. And in each place we traveled through, there is a memorial for fallen soldiers killed by Russia in this war. And we met multiple refugees on the way from Pokrovsk, from Izum, so from Kharkiv, Donetsk regions, and they are integrated in the communities. They live there for 4 years now, and I don't see that there is the border where you can just divide Ukraine on east and west. You can divide it by regions. We have ethnic regions, we have different Ukrainians everywhere, and we all have our own peculiarities, but it's normal for any country. And if you ever hear the East versus West and Russian versus Ukrainian language narrative, just remember it's a totally Russian narrative. It's not what it looks like on the ground. And if you live in Ukraine, if you travel in Ukraine, if you're not just watching TV, because some people never travel, then you will witness, you will see that it's not simply true. It's the truth is more complicated. We have different challenges, but everybody is united now against Russia, because Russians bring sorrow to families across all Ukraine. Everybody has somebody who were killed by Russians, either via bombing or via the war itself directly. So that's it. That's the situation. More or less, hopefully I covered a few things. As promised, I will record another video about the economic situation, because it's again a long talk. But otherwise, thank you for staying with me. Thank you for staying with Ukraine. Please do talk to your friends, to your family, educate them as well, support Ukraine. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for watching. And I hope to see you very soon under way better circumstances. Goodbye for now.